Hey, what's up guys? Harry here, and today I've got a good video for you on should you ever end an Uber trip early? So I haven't actually been asked this question too many times, but I do see it come up a lot in comments on my site and comments on forums, Facebook groups, and all that stuff. So the reason why, you might encounter this situation, and I've actually done it a couple times as a driver, but I've actually seen it a couple times as a passenger on Uber too. So basically when it happens is, let's say you're out there, you're driving, you make a mistake, you miss a turn, you don't go to the right place, or something like that. I mean, sometimes, right, you put it, the GPS takes you to the wrong place, or so there's lots of scenarios, but it's basically when you screw up or it's somehow your fault and you want to basically show good faith to the passenger and say, hey, I'm sorry I made this mistake. Let me end the trip early and you won't get charged for the last quarter mile or half mile or mile. And so obviously the main incentive behind this, why a lot of drivers do this, is because first of all, if you make an error, you feel bad. If you went to the wrong location and the passenger told you to go somewhere else, you don't want to charge them for your mistake. Second, right behind that is probably you don't want them to rate you lower, right? If you made a mistake, generally most of the time I'm pretty upfront. If it's something small, it's not really a big deal if you miss a turn, but if you make a bigger mistake and it's clearly your fault, it's sometimes nice and a kind of a good sign of faith, show of faith to the passenger to say, hey, I'm sorry that I messed up in this situation. I'm going to end the trip early. Obviously let them know why you're doing it and say, hey, I made this mistake. I'm going to end this trip early. And, then you kind of deep down hope that they don't rate you lower, right? So most of the time, it's not really a big deal, but it is a good way of kind of letting the passenger know that you're sorry, and it's more of a gesture than anything. Definitely let them know that you did it. And I mean, you're not going to get a tip or anything like that generally. I mean, obviously on Uber, you won't get a tip, but maybe on Lyft, your passenger might say, oh, hey, this guy was nice. They might leave you a tip. I don't think it's really necessarily though for tips. You're mainly doing it to save your rating. So, or if you just feel like you screwed up and you owe them. So if you have a high rating, if you have 4.9 and 5.0 and you make a mistake, it's really not a big deal. You can still do this if you want to save your rating, but I mean, the difference between a 4.9 and a 4.8 really won't get you anything. Personally, I'll only do it if I make some type of really egregious error, which does happen from time to time, but very rarely. Once you start dipping into the 4.7, especially 4.6 range though, I mean, I'm pretty comfortable around, I'm at a 4.9 right now on Lyft or 5.0 on Lyft, I think, over my last rides, and 4.93 on Uber. But I don't mind dipping down to a 4.8. It's when you start getting into the 4.7 range, because obviously at 4.6 you risk deactivation. That's when you really want to start thinking about things like this, because you obviously want to watch out for it. So basically, if you're making mistakes and you're worried that your rating is already too low, or you care about maintaining, I know a lot of drivers like me, I mean, I actually do this probably more than I should, but just because I'm very protective of my rating, and even though I know the difference between a 4.9 and a 4.8 isn't a lot, I still really have a lot of pride in keeping that 4.9, and that's just how I am. But so that's kind of something that you want to consider, and when it comes into play, that's why drivers end the trip early at times. Now, I actually emailed Uber about this, and they said that you can always email in afterwards to adjust your fare if you're worried about your rating, if you mess up. But obviously at that point, it really won't do much. I mean, you can tell the passenger, or you can email in to Uber and say, hey, can you adjust their fare lower instead of ending the trip early? But at that point, the rider has already rated, and I mean, unless you made a huge $20, $30 error, it's probably not going to be a big difference. And so that solution from Uber doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think it's kind of typical of the disconnect between Uber and its drivers. They really don't understand what's going out on the road, and the fact that you can email in to adjust a fare, that's not going to do anything. I mean, drivers are ending the trip early because they don't want to be rated lower, to put it frankly. So I don't think that's really a solution. But one thing that I did start wondering about was the insurance aspect. Obviously, there's been a ton of news and information on insurance lately, and there's these gaps and kind of things that I've covered on my site that you need to be careful about. And one thing I was thinking, that if you end the trip, you go from being in period 3, when you have up to $1 million in liability on Uber, collision coverage with $1,000 deductible on Uber, you go back to period 1, right? Because once that period 3 ends when the trip is over. But if you end the trip early, do you go from period 3 to period 1? So that was kind of the question that I posed to Uber. And because in my mind, that's actually a big risk for drivers, right? If that you end the trip early and now you're back into period one with lower liability limits, instead of the 1 million, it's 100,000, 300,000, 250, whatever it is. And then you have no collision coverage during period one, only back to your personal insurer. But technically, you're really still giving a ride at that point, even if you accidentally end your trip early. And even if you do it on accident, right? Maybe you accidentally end your trip or purposefully. So I thought that was a big risk. So I emailed Uber about it, and they actually, at first, it took them a while to answer, as you guys can probably relate. My customer service email chain with them was pretty funny. Finally, I got pretty forceful with them. I said, look, you guys need to escalate this to a manager to get my question answered, or tell me, look exactly, get a manager to review this. I need to know the answer, because you guys keep on basically just giving me canned responses and not even coming close to answering my question. What happens if I end the trip early? Do I go from period 3 to period 1? Because if that's the case, it probably shouldn't be ending trips early, because you're putting yourself, the driver, at a lot of risk. And finally, they got back to me and they said that yes, it does go to period 1. And for a while, I was going to record this video and I was thinking, man, this is a huge kind of risk for drivers. I can't imagine that Uber would let their passengers, and I mean more on the passenger side, right? They've kind of shown that there's some gaps with the driver coverage, but more on the passenger side, the passengers could be at huge risk if their driver ends the trip early. That didn't really make a lot of sense to me. So I actually put in a media request to Uber to get someone a little bit more authoritative back to me, and they got back to me and they actually told me that that customer service rep was wrong. So what it all means is if you guys do end the trip early, you stay on period 3. Period 3 actually doesn't end until your passenger gets out of the car. So as soon as they get out of the car, whether the trip has been accidentally ended, you ended it early, as long as they're still in the car, you still have full coverage, and then you can drop them off and you really don't need to worry about any of this. So that obviously makes a lot more sense. I actually, I really didn't believe the customer service, and I'm glad that I sent in that meter request, because otherwise I could have made this video and first of all, it would have been wrong. But second of all, I'm glad that just in general, that isn't the case, because I think that the insurance, period 3 insurance, should last all the way until the rider gets out. So this video may have been more than you guys expected, but a lot of interesting information to cover. And just so you guys know, I'm out there doing some research, trying to figure this stuff out for you. So if you guys have any other questions you want to get answered, if you have any topics you want me to research, leave a comment, shoot me an email, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll definitely look forward to hearing from you. All right, take care.